Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Pokemon Legends Arceus. So, to save you all the loading screen, I just decided to start here. So, yay, we're going into the actual meat and potatoes of the game where we have pretty much free roam to do whatever we want besides follow the, main quest marker.
If there's one thing I don't like about Legends of Arceus, it's how long it takes to tutorialize its gameplay loop. And I understand why they did it, because it's such a new gameplay loop for the series. And I don't know, game designers in the modern day just, they feel the need to... How do I put this nicely? They shove the instruction manual down your throat over the first 3 hours of any game. And it's fucking
it's I was
obnoxious.
mentioning this before, but Pokemon is designed to be about as accessible of an RPG as you can get. It's not like Pokemon's mechanics are particularly unique, like elemental resistances and weaknesses and whatnot are in every game, but not every game, but a lot of RPGs. But the only having four moves so that you're not overwhelmed with choices, the very clear delineation between what's good against what, generally just not being super difficult, the challenges being faced based around specific types so that you know what you need to do. Like, Pokemon is designed to be very beginner friendly in general. And a lot of that still does apply here. So it is surprising to me that, so much of this early game is as handholdy as it is. I mean, granted, a lot of the Pokemon games within the past couple of years have been very handholdy.
If,
I'm not.
if there's one thing I'll compliment Scarlet and Violet on, it's the way that opening sequence is not very long if you just blaze through it, but it also gives you a lot of freedom while you're learning the ropes. I spent, on my first playthrough, about 2 hours just in that first open world chunk where you're learning how to catch Pokemon before the second Nemona fight. Just catching all the Pokemon I could find. There are so many Pokemon, Jesus Christ, in that one little area. And it's like, okay.
I'm never finishing this.
And you don't even have to go straight to the town. You can wander off and explore this whole big side area with some ruins and a bunch of hypnos. There's
Man, if there's one thing that Scarlet and Violet I wish it had is just stuff that's more satisfying to find. Because when you're playing Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, where you see something cool and then you climb that mountain or you get to that weird thing and then you find a chest and it's just 5 arrows or an opal. It feels like that's the whole game for Scarlet and Violet. A lot of the time.
Every 5 feet along the ground, there's an item sparkle or an item ball, and sometimes it's a TM, which is good because it unlocks more TMs for crafting. But most of the time, it's a berry or a regular Pokeball or a potion. Actually, that's a good find because if you just let yourself stockpile normal potions, you can mash the auto heal button until the end of time and never run out of HP.
And granted, the part of the reason why there's so much random crap lying on the ground in these kinds of games to begin with is because you want there to be you got to keep that dopamine flowing. You can't let it stop ever. So there's got to be something shiny. You know how in Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, where they make a joke about how, these games are just about picking up shiny things, and then there's just a line of shiny things you have to pick up in a row. That's actually how open world games work, but in a good way.
Yes and no, because the more, let's say, hardcore open world games are generally more about the really in-depth systems attached to those kind of things. Like Skyrim, Elder Scrolls in general, there's almost nothing to find. Unless you care about alchemy, in which case you can find all sorts of flowers and shit. But you're not going to care about alchemy unless you're specifically playing an alchemist character. And if you're specifically playing an alchemist character, it's not a whole line of shiny things. It's a fucking spreadsheet of chemical ingredients and you're building and you're making all sorts of concoctions with it.
Ye old
And
Excel.
only certain areas have certain ingredients, and you have to make sure to remember where each one is. And it's just like,
Oh,
holy shit.
oh,
That's
this Rapidash. I want to talk about this Rapidash for a
that's the
second.
Rapidash that I tried to catch on stream. Jesus.
That like you find so like you see a couple of alpha Pokemon before this, and they're like Bibarels or
The Rapidash is fucking terrifying.
it's like level 45 or something. And like if you get too close to it, it will murder you.
It's like the T-Rex at the beginning of Final Fantasy 12. Jesus. Fuck.
Yeah. So yeah, but like for most open world games, there's like one of two models it can be. It can either be Symphony of the Night, where you're finding stuff every 5 seconds, or it can be Metroid, where you don't find anything ever, but the things you do find are extremely helpful.
Well, it's kind of different. It's kind of difficult to quantify, because all open world games essentially sort of have their roots in this really hardcore involved RPG genre that nobody in their right mind in the 2020s would ever play, except me, because I'm insane.
They are very Ultima wizardry-esque, where for a long time it was about streamlining those kinds of things. Like
yeah, but in the early days, it was about playing a game that was sort of 2/3 simulation, where it was supposed to emulate the actual experience of being a Lord of the Rings character traveling for 6 weeks to get to the next town over. I wish I was exaggerating, but I've played Daggerfall.
Yeah, it is very interesting where games about exploring are more just about like seeing the sights and finding stuff versus like the rough and gritty like actual like survival elements of exploring, which you tend to see more of that in crafting type games like Minecraft or Terraria, about the survival aspect of exploring, like having to set up torches everywhere you go and make sure you have enough food.
You make yourself, when you realize you'll have to spend a certain amount of time in a specific region, you'll scout for a good base area, and you'll spend time building a base where you have all your little food growing places and your crafting stations and stuff. And you'll spend like maybe the next 10 hours working out of that base of operations and just sort of going out to whatever direction and then returning.
Yeah, it's a lot different than like these sorts of games where it's just kind of like, okay, you're just like going and seeing what you can find.
Yeah. And it's like, it does make a real difference to the gameplay loop, too. I've mentioned this before, but when Skyrim did its little official mod DLC creation club thing, one of the things they added was survival mode, which shuts off quick travel and makes it so that you have to manage both both a heat and cold meter and a hunger bar on top of the normal gameplay loop. And because you can't fast travel, and you have to deal with weather conditions in whatever area you're going to, and you have to keep a stock of food, it suddenly makes all those pointless houses you can buy really important to the gameplay loop, because you need to have a house that you can return to, store all your fucking food, and, get back there to sleep, because if you don't sleep, you're going to have to deal with some really bad debuffs. It doesn't kill you like in some of the mod versions of survival mode, but...
Okay, so when does the game become fun?
This is the ride.
The game becomes fun when you add a carriage mod that makes the carriages worth a damn, because it turns out Skyrim wasn't designed to have no fast travel. But once you've gotten over that hurdle, it's actually really engaging to establish a base of operations and branch out from that base of operations. It actually gives the weird random-ass sandboxy side questing loop some focus, in a way, because you're only gonna want to explore areas and do side quests that are within traveling distance of wherever your current base is. And you're only gonna want to move your base once you've cleared all that stuff out. So it kind of like... the normal Skyrim loop is to just go wherever the fuck, and if you get bored with a particular area, you just fast travel on over to an area you haven't been to in a while and do some stuff over there. And it's very fun, but it's also a casual sort of fun. It's a bit brainless, you're eventually going to lose interest unless you get really in depth on the you get really in depth interested in the more involved aspects of the game. But it gets a bit repetitive, is what I'm saying. But if you have to deal with the survival mode aspect at the same time, it does do a lot to engage your brain because you're having to plan more stuff in advance.
It's these sorts of things you have to remember are designed with a very specific type of player in mind.
Yeah.
Like not every gamer is going to like a game that in depth, which is why RPGs scare so many people, to be honest.
Yeah.
They see a bunch of numbers and math and spells and they think that it's going to be something that they can't play, which is why
Homework.
which is part of the appeal of Pokemon is that they make all this stuff very accessible. But
well, that's also why Skyrim took off so much, is that it removed a lot of the visible number shit, and it streamlined things, arguably too much, but it made itself very unintimidating to new players. I say arguably too much because the specific ways that it streamlined itself kind of encouraged every new player to play the exact same way from the very start. And you have to consciously break that habit in your brain if you want to explore all the other cool things you can do with character builds and shit. But it's a tough balancing act. If you're trying to make an RPG that is both accessible but has a reasonably high skill ceiling for the tactical adventure simulation element, because if you go too far in the accessible direction, what you have is an open world RPG that really never exceeds the game structure complexity of early game World of Warcraft, and that's the kind of game that gets boring really, really fast without some kind of social element.
Yeah, it's like so early Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy and other RPGs in that vein are basically designed to be streamlined versions of the extremely old Western RPGs that would go on to become your Elder Scrolls and whatnot. So the thing about your Final Fantasies and Dragon Quests and whatnot is that they're generally fairly short games. Like the intimidation about 100-hour RPGs, JRPGs is one thing, but like the really old ones, like most SNES RPGs are like 30 hours long tops, which I know sounds really long for people who are used to like 4-hour games, but trust me when I say that compared to some of the stuff you see on the PlayStation 1 and 2, that's very manageable. So like I would say the type of structure Lewis is describing is very much apparent in those like early kinds of RPGs.
It depends on how early you're going, because there was a point in time where even the most complex RPGs couldn't be very long because they just didn't have the space for it.
Yeah.
Ultima 1 is like a 2-hour game.
I'm thinking more like 16-bit is what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
8-bit, 16-bit sort of RPGs where it's just like Dragon Quest 3, for example, great game, but it doesn't have a lot of in-depth exploration. Like you go over the overworld, you find a town, you find a dungeon, you explore the dungeon, you get the shit, you move on. And the game isn't meant, and it doesn't wear itself thin because it's a 30-hour game. And by the time you're about to get tired of it, you're done. Versus, let's say, Dragon Quest 7, which is a 120-hour game, and you keep doing the same shit over and over and over again, and it never ends, and you run out of classes to do, and you don't have to care in battle anymore because you have 50 different screen nukes that cost no MP, and oh god. If you want the video game equivalent of Purgatory, play Dragon Quest 7. Because it is the video game equivalent of Purgatory. I shit you not.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it's exploration in these kinds of games is meant to just kind of be sort of flowing and not super in depth, I guess.
Yeah.
So, which is fine because that I feel like that fits Pokemon better than really having to like get super. Oh my god, I forgot how much the grass jittered.
Yeah.
Oh
And
my god.
like another good example, in a less cartoony, child-friendly sense, is The Witcher 3. There's a reason that game is so popular as to basically be a game design criticism meme. And one of the reasons is that it balances exploration accessibility and exploration depth pretty well. It does so by streamlining things that were previously pretty time consuming. For example, a major element of the Witcher series is finding ingredients and crafting potions, because potions, are kind of a Witcher's bread and butter. Their modus operandi is to craft specific kind of potions before they engage with the monster they're hunting, so that they have an advantage against that specific monster, and then they chug the potions right before the battle, and then they go to town. But in previous Witcher games, you'd have to individually gather ingredients and individually craft potions, and you'd have to have a good stock of whatever it was you needed, or else before the hunt that you don't have a potion for, you'd have to go hunting for the ingredients and go make the potion. In The Witcher 3, the ingredient system is more streamlined. There are certain things that you only need to do once to have access to a potion, and then you need to refill your stock of that potion. And that does require some doing, but not as much doing as crafting every single potion individually.
So I was actually thinking, oh, what is up with The Witcher, actually? Because, like, Witcher 3 was huge, 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 huge. And then, like, we didn't hear anything about it, and I was like, what have they been doing? And Cyberpunk is one thing, and that ended up being one of the video games of all time.
It's a decent enough game. It's more that the game had a terrible launch.
They're doing an expansion pack, which I hadn't even heard of, and they're remaking the first game, which I feel like makes a lot of sense. 'Cause I don't know if the books are still going, so I don't know how they handle like lore between the books and games. And TV show and whatnot.
I'll tell you right now how they do it. The games take place after the books.
Cool.
In this kind of bizarre alternate timeline where, how do I say this without I can't spoil it, because in order to tell you how the games follow from the books, I have to spoil a major thing in the ending of the book. So I'm not.
The books have been done for years.
Yeah.
Like, so here's the thing. Like, they were originally Polish, which I knew. They were released in the 90s in Poland, which I didn't even really know. And then they went into English in like the mid 2000s. After the video game came out. Okay.
Yeah, the video games were part of the reason they got translated, and the popularity of the video games is part of the reason they got such a good English translation. I don't necessarily mean good in the sense that they're really good literal translations of the Polish. I mean good in the sense that they're really, really fun to read in English, as in the English translation is well written. Okay. I feel that's important, because a lot of light novel fans seem to value literalism over the book actually being well written in the translated language.
Yeah, because grass.
Oh no, grass.
Scary grass. Oh man. Yeah, I mean, but we also, I mean, I have thoughts about the people who think that there can be a pure quotation marks translation of anything, but that's a discussion we've had before, and I don't particularly feel like
we've got like a minute left. We don't have time for that can of worms.
Yeah. You didn't catch that, Geodude? It had like one thing left. You could have done it.
But like, back to the Witcher games, they follow up after the books, and they're basically telling their own continuous story, although there are like returning characters from the books and stuff. So it definitely pays to read the books first.
And the TV show is an adaptation of the books.
I'm making a sort of like, my hand is up here and I'm wiggling it sort of gesture.
Okay, that's all I need to know.
The Netflix show is not great. It has its redeeming qualities. One of those redeeming qualities is Henry Cavill does a good Geralt. Geralt. Geralt is the Fire Emblem character. Okay, so but like there are actually 2 television series for The Witcher. There's an older one. There's an older one. I think it was a Polish series. But yeah, it's been adapted to television before.
I
It's
did not know that.
The Witcher is actually like really big in Poland.
I'm not surprised.
It's only with the video games that they became popular overseas, but the somewhat sad but also like I feel no pity story behind that is that the author sold the video game rights to CD Projekt Red for peanuts because he had no faith in video games as a medium. And then when the games turned out to be really popular, he turned around and tried to get more money out of it. I'm not sure how that story ends because I didn't follow it, but that's the general gist of it. And I'm just like, yeah, but you also like only landed in that situation because you had no vision. So, you kind of your own fault.